So this morning, we move from step one to tradition one. We begin that bridge from me to we. Um, in the language of the original tradition, it says our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on AA unity. So if we take AA out of it, so that we broaden this out into a metaphysical approach, it becomes our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends on unity. And if we recall the last 2 weeks of our exploration, understanding how the law of cause and effect works, we can take out should, because the law of cause and effect operates the same no matter who's using it, no matter how it's being used. And in the truth of oneness, everything is impacted. Everything, everybody, seen and unseen. Right? There's no way for a part of one to not be impacted. It's just not. It's not reasonable. It's not possible. So then it becomes our common welfare comes first. Personal recovery depends on unity. And I want to introduce a quote from the Science of Mind magazine in July of 1995. And I tried researching who actually wrote this, and I was not able to surface that. So if you happen to know, I would love for you to share that with me. Here's what it says. We are bound into a supreme unity. We are tied into an immutable law of irrevocable cause and effect. That is the unity moving into action. Cause and effect is something that happens as a result of the use of unity. Consequently, there are one even we are one even while we are many. And since each of us is a part of the whole, if we seek to destroy each other, we only ultimately hurt ourselves. Let me say that again. If we seek to destroy each other, we only ultimately hurt ourselves. This is the great lesson of life. Freedom, then, will come only to such degree as we no longer do anything that hurts anyone. Now, if we flip that to a positive, when we do what is best for the whole, it is always going to be the best for each part of the whole. And if I think of things in terms of our common welfare comes first, it doesn't make it easier. I wish I could tell you that it does. But there are some challenges with who's defining common, who's defining welfare, and who's defining common welfare. Because those things are going to be interpreted differently depending on our conditioning, depending on our socialization, depending on our belief systems. And so I think it behooves us to really explore, what do these words mean to us? What largely unconscious beliefs are operating, moving consciousness into action in the unity of one? that are completely out of our awareness. I get that. That's a journey, and it's sometimes an uncomfortable journey. I got a text message late last night asking whether or not we were going to have service today. And honestly, the last time I looked at the weather report, it wasn't supposed to start snowing until 2:30. And so it hadn't occurred to me to shift out of in person. And then the more I looked, the more anxiety I started experiencing. Not because things were different, but because I have a lot of conditioning about getting it right and not wanting to be the one who's wrong. And I realized how perfect that is. It fits into this. Our common welfare comes first. And was able to really sit with the challenges of understanding that I don't necessarily understand those terms. Intellectually, I know what the words mean in the dictionary. And in the experience of oneness, I don't always know, maybe I never know, how some other part of the whole is going to be impacted. Because oftentimes, and I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, can relate, we take action really thinking we're doing the best thing. And then it turns out to be a total train wreck. And it has impacts that were unintended. Right? And so, do we ever really know? And in this human iteration, we have this part of us that really wants to know we're getting it right. And so I think part of this dance with the tradition is learning to let go of that, learning to trust and act from our spiritual center more than our head, to go within. And even if it doesn't make sense necessarily, to have the courage to step into, this is what I'm being given. This is how I'm being guided, to trust that at every level of our lives, in our relationships, with our children, in our jobs, and all of it. And I don't think it means that we don't experience bumps, but I do think it means that we know that something greater is happening. Part of what is surfaced in the book studies is recognizing that just because something looks like a disaster doesn't mean it is. That volcanic eruptions may look like a disaster in the moment, and yet they have purpose in the evolution of the whole. And so, can we begin to see and hold a greater idea of common welfare without using it as an excuse? And I want to close with that, because we can use, well, it's for the common welfare, as an excuse to do outrageous things to one another. And ultimately, I submit that in the truth of our wholeness, in the truth of our oneness, the center of our being knows. The center of our being knows. And to really be attentive to that. Are you trusting your head, which may have a selfish motive? Or are you trusting the core of you, the authentic you, the whole you that is inextricably connected to all? I want to close with a reiteration of that quote from Martin Luther King. I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So I invite you to spend some time this week exploring the words common, welfare, depends, and unity. The study guides will be in the newsletter, and they will be available to you. And I will have them printed out next week when we're there in person. But really put some time into this and let yourself grapple with what your head means, what your heart means, and what your gut knows. Thus ends today's lesson.